Hello everybody, my name is Michael Harkey. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is Decision Trees as a training tool for your incident response team. And so, welcome now for the main event. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker. He's a managing partner here at Infotex, a MSSP provider and IT audit firm, the awareness guru of Indiana, the man with 13 letters after his name and they all spell incident response, Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I forgot to figure out who my shout-out's going to go to, but I did see a few clients on the way in as I was getting ready to do this webinar, and so you know who you are. I think it's great that you're attending this webinar because I think you'll be able to use the deliverables from this to continue the training of your incident response team. And so what I want to talk about in our webinar today is why we should be training our incident response team in the first place. And then I'm going to show you the context of all the tools that we've kind of created over the years. And just so you know, we've been watching bank and hospital and credit union networks since about 2000. And in doing that, in the early days, we would work with people that the reason why they hired us is because they had an incident. So, they already had gone through something terrible, but I'd say about 2005, 2006 is when we started being able to sell our services to a lot of organizations that did not really have an incident in the past, so they didn't have their whole management team on board. And so we created a set of tools over the years that can be used to train your incident response team. And then finally, the gist of this webinar is how can you use decision trees to supplement your training program for your incident response team. And so just starting off, why should we train our incident response team? To me, what we've learned over the years is that when you establish an incident response program, which is one of the most important programs that needs to be established, it's just all in response to the fact that we're not going to be able to mitigate every risk, and there is no such thing as 100%. And so, over the past 3 years, I've been hearing a lot of executives in banks and hospitals and credit unions as they're pulling their heads out of the sand saying it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so the mission of a good incident response program is to have a program in place so that when that career-threatening incident does occur, the management team recognizes the process as the ISO unfolds it. That's really a good incident response program. We don't want to be shooting from the hip. We don't want to be making things up on the fly. We really want to be in a position where the management team can say, been there, done that. We know how this works. We recognize when we need to inform our customers. We recognize when we need to pull the trigger and call our insurance company and bring in forensics people or whatever. And so way back in the day, in the year 2001, NIST had some guidance, NIST being the National Organization for the Development of Security Standards. Actually, it's the National Institute on Security Standards. And their original guidance established proactive goals, reactive goals, and proactive reactive goals for an incident response team. And so we have proactive goals such as, let's make sure we try to stop an incident from occurring in the first place. Let's establish when we need to contact our customers, when we need to inform our regulators, et cetera, et cetera. We have reactive goals. How are we going to act when we actually are in an incident? And then finally, this is kind of how we try to encourage people to do that post-mortem review, but we also have proactive reactive goals. And we spent a lot of time talking to our clients about developing proactive reactive goals, which are basically the learning from an incident, the post-mortem review, the post-incident follow-up. Why, if we have to go through this incident in the first place, why not get the value that we could get by learning from the incident so that the next time something like this happens, maybe we can stop it from occurring in the first place. Now, we've gone so far as to create really fancy diagrams like this showing how the proactive reactive goals are really integrating and touching upon all four corners of the institution, as well as all of the other programs that we may have in place from an IT governance perspective, from an information security perspective. And so, our proactive reactive goals should involve making sure that people know how the broadcast awareness processes work, that our customer awareness training maybe can be updated based on what we learn from a particular incident. Do we need to update our disaster recovery and business continuity plans? And how do we interact with the media? And the media is just one part, by the way, of all the different gears that go into an incident response program. And this diagram, which has come from the most recent NIST guidance, really establishes the notion that the incident response team is not just the people in the bank who have had the unfortunate experience of being named to be on yet another committee. Our incident response team includes the response teams from our peer organizations. If we go to the IBA, if we go to the OBL to attend a conference, there's a good chance that everybody else there is on somebody else's incident response team, and we can learn from them. We can learn from our internet service providers, et cetera. And so we need to train the incident response team as to when and how we're going to reach out to these other entities that are really members of our overall incident response team. If you've been to any of my workshops, you know that I have a whole story I tell to kind of help make the point that we don't want to be taking a Lone Ranger approach to really anything in information security, but definitely in incident response. And way back in the early 2000s, we would use this whole Lone Ranger approach to help convince the president of a bank or a credit union that, hey, you need more than just the IT people involved in incident response. Do you really want your IT person to be the person who decides when we're going to send out that reputation threatening letter to all of our customers? Meanwhile, we want to make sure that everybody in the whole organization, if we talk about incident response teams as being and including not just the members of the committee, but also our employees, our the law enforcement that we have to work with, our customers even, other organizations' incident response teams, then we really want to make sure we are doing a good job of defining how we're going to act when someone becomes suspicious. And so what we spent a lot of time doing is teaching not just the incident response team, but the organization as a whole, that if you ever become suspicious about something, maybe you took a weird phone call or maybe you clicked on a link, the first thing you want to do is get with your supervisor, and then you and your supervisor can decide who and how is the appropriate everybody. We want to make sure everybody is informed of our suspicion before we then bring the information security officer into the equation. Once we have the ISO involved, then the ISO will decide, should we call an emergency incident response team? And then it's the ISO's leadership of the incident response team that establishes when and how we're going to notify the board of directors. Do we need to bring in forensics people or law enforcement? Do we need to notify our customers? Are we going to have to send a press release, or will we be answering questions that are posed by people in the media? And so we have to train this team in advance of an incident. That's the main reason why we need to train the team, is so that they recognize the process as it unfolds. This is a great graphic that really kind of establishes an overall information incident response life cycle, I should say.
Dan,
starting with the fact that,
Dan,
yes.
you made your point.
Yes.
People wouldn't be logging into this webinar if they didn't understand why they need to train their incident response teams. And we're running out of time. Can you move on, please?
Oh. All right. Well, okay. And just so you know, I was going to offer $1 million to whoever guessed who published this.
Carry on. Carry on, then.
No, that's okay. We can move on. But suffice it to say, this is from the latest NIST guidance on incident response. There is an incident response lifecycle that includes post-incident activity. It's very big on training your incident response team. But Mike, hey, since you want to be involved in this webinar so bad, how about we go ahead and trigger a poll here?
Sure. Please take a moment to answer the poll on your screen. We'd appreciate it.
Well, hey, Michael, the Jeopardy song's done. Are we ready to move on?
We are. Carry on.
Okay. Well, great. So I hope you all, answered that poll. We'll share the results with you a little bit down the road in our webinar. But the poll really is to help make a really good point, because very often we'll talk to banks about, establishing an incident response team. Usually it's either a part of an audit or it's part of our setup when we're working with them as a managed security service provider. And very often we hear banks say, well, our incident response team's only meeting, and nowadays it's quarterly. It used to be sometimes semi-annually or annually. Or sometimes we're starting to hear people say bi-monthly. And the reason for this is usually because we really don't have a lot of incidents. And I'm just, really wanting to establish the fact that there's a lot of work that should and could be done by the incident response team. And if you're meeting quarterly or even bi-monthly, I don't know how you're getting that work done. But a big part of the work is training the team. And so I encourage all of our clients to meet on a monthly basis, create a standard agenda so that you're covering everything that should be covered. And then if you have a month where there's not a lot going on, hey, maybe your policy says you meet bi-monthly, but and therefore you can skip that particular month. But the point is that there is a lot of work that needs to take place. What I'd like to do now is just kind of dive into some of the training tools that we're seeing as we work with banks and credit unions, and to a lesser extent hospitals. Starting with the fact that those meetings, the monthly meeting is a training meeting. It is an awareness meeting. If nothing else, once a month, it reestablishes the notion that it's a matter of when, not if, and we need to be ready. I'm seeing more and more organizations overcome the political capital that you might need to burn in order to get the usually executives that are members of your team to take and participate in comprehension exercises. They're very, very helpful, and quite frankly, the gist of this webinar, using decision trees to train your incident response team, could be treated as a comprehension exercise. But they're geared around, this is our plan. The plan is, we're trying to make our plans as simple as we possibly can, but I'll often ask an incident response team member, what are the 3 classes of incidents, and they're challenged to be able to, define the 3 classes of incidents. A lot of times they'll say, well, there's the one where we have to notify our customers, and then I think there's 2 more. I don't really understand the difference between them. We want our team to know how what we mean when we say we have a potential disclosure incident, what we mean when we say it's a negative incident. I just want to make you aware of it. We don't have to spend all kinds of time explaining what the meaning of our class is, or classification is, when we're in a panic. Meanwhile, one of the things that we're very happy to see in guidance that has been updated over the past few years is that we are now required to conduct tabletop tests if we want to be at baseline with the cybersecurity assessment tool for the financial institutions, and understand what I'm talking about when I say that. And those tabletop tests are an amazingly good training tool if you conduct them properly. And then finally, of course, the gist of what we're going to be talking about today, the decision trees make a great incident response training tool. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of show you a typical incident response program. Just so you know, we've got a deliverable we're going to give to you as a part of this webinar here today. But I want to show you the context that that deliverable lives within. And so most organizations that have a good, well-defined incident response program will have an incident response policy. If you're a smaller organization, hopefully you can reduce that whole policy down to about 1 page. And it's just the board of directors saying, yes, we realize there's no such thing as 100%. We realize it's a matter of when, not if. And so the management team needs to do this about the fact that we're going to eventually have an incident. And the this then is usually an organization's incident response plan. There's complex plans. There's plans that even reach out and talk about various scenarios because we don't want to bog the whole plan down with, you know, how we're going to respond to a DDoS attack. And so, you know, we can also simplify our plan, which is what I encourage institutions about 500 million and less to do, is to try to simplify your plan as much as possible. Maybe use these scenarios as training tools, but the plan itself, let's keep that simple so that it's easy for us to follow the plan when we're in a panic. And then finally, those training scenarios, by the way, are also in this directory structure, but this is really where the work of training the incident response team could take place. I do not recommend that a smaller bank, you know, even a bank under $1 billion, go so far as to define every single one of these documents that we have in here, but we could bring up the risk monitoring architecture boilerplate that Infotex makes available and use that to kind of help, you know, establish when will we be, I better just read. Sorry about that. But anyway, when will we, you know, who's going to do what when it comes to monitoring for risk? You know, this is what all the technical people cover, but what are the non-technical people going to cover? And so those types of issues, do we want to do them formally? Do we want to, you know, hold our management team members responsible for understanding the lingo of incident response if we really, you know, get into the, you know, weeds of it? You know, obviously we don't, but it does make a good tool. It does make a good document that we can bring up and have a 15-minute discussion about, because our monthly incident response team meeting's about 15 minutes shy. The response tools, the tools that we will use in a response, which, you know, really to me starts with the, you know, if we think something's bad, boy, we better pull out a log and start documenting it, right? Well, let's show the incident response team what this log could look like. And, you know, I'm not saying that every log needs to look like this, but this is just a starting point that could be used. And so the point is that maybe we ought to, you know, start talking to the incident response team about, you know, what should be documented during the incident and who's going to be doing the documentation and what tool can we use to assist with that documentation. Likewise, you know, how are we going to track our incidents from, you know, from month to month? Can we use the tracking as the postmortem review itself, which is how this is set up? Why make a special document for postmortem review? Unless it's a real bad incident, maybe we should write up a memo, because let's face it, the board's going to want to read it, right? But for most incidents, most security incidents, most, you know, negative incidents that, you know, don't rise to the level of having to notify our customers, we can probably just document our lessons and action items in a spreadsheet like this and make the whole, you know, incident documentation process a lot easier. But my point is from a training perspective, we should be talking to our incident response team about, you know, hey, sometimes we might want to have a media reader. If we fear that a journalist is going to show up at one of our branches asking questions, let's make a media reader available to our branch managers, unless we proactively decided just to have them refer the journalist to the office. You know, talking points that we give out to our tellers, so that if customers start asking about something, we want them to give us the unified message to anybody who's asking. That's something that we should talk about in advance of an incident. We obviously won't be able to customize it to the incident until we actually get into the incident, but if we have to teach our incident response team why and what you know, talking point memo is for incidents when we're in a panic, that's just going to make our response that much more clunky. And then finally, a lot of training tools, of course, are just focused in on keeping those meetings going. And this is where I, have the cusp of what we're going to be talking about today. But over the years, you can develop PowerPoints. You can have comprehension exercises. You can have quizzes focused in on the triage process, et cetera, et cetera. What we're really interested in talking about today, though, of course, is the decision tree. And how, well, I guess one of the things I wanted to show here is that if you look at our boilerplate set, and I don't know if it's going to be here. No, it's not going to be here. But we have a small bank kit is what we called it. We had a couple clients say, hey, I want you to whittle this back as far as it can possibly go. And in the small bank kit, which is not, this is just from a workshop way back in July of 2016, which was before we created that small bank kit. But in the small bank kit, we indeed had, we decided that, well, if we're going to whittle it back as far as we could go, we should leave the decision tree in there. And the main reason why is because if you want to get rid of all the fluff, if you just want to focus in on just the facts, if you want to use the 80-20 rule towards training your incident response team, I would say A, the plan, walk them through the plan, make sure they understand the plan. B, the tabletop test, and then C, the incident response decision tree. Which we're going to walk through with the rest of our webinar here today. So let's talk a little bit at a high level about decision trees first, which starts with asking who should monitor the accepted risk in our organization. So we're all doing risk assessments. I used to say on an annual basis. I feel like we all can agree now that we're doing risk assessments all year long. But at some point in time in the annual IT governance cycle that we're all maintaining, we end up with a formal document that we report to the board. This is the risk that we're accepting. We're not going to mitigate this risk. And so if, I'm just going to use a real outrageous example, but if we decide that, hey, we're going to accept the risk of not having a firewall, then who would be responsible for monitoring to make sure that we made a good decision there, which of course is a terrible decision. And the answer could be everybody. I mean, in order for us to all be diligent and all be on guard, we could say, well, we all are trying to monitor that risk. But let's face it, it's the incident response team who should receive the results of that risk assessment, who should be watching for the exploit of a vulnerability that we decided not to mitigate because we felt that either the risk was too low or the residual risk was already low, or the risk reward or the mitigation reward didn't warrant the cost of mitigating the risk, right? And so basic risk management hopefully will deliver to us a handful of ideas or handful of issues where, hey, we're not doing anything about this, or we're not doing anything more about this. And so we should keep an eye out on somebody trying to exploit this particular vulnerability. And so an overall risk monitoring architecture usually includes first the establishment of the policy and the plan, some sort of technical monitoring tools. We put them all under the roof of a SIEM or Security Information Event Management System. And then the incident response team, especially in smaller organizations, we're relying on the incident response team to monitor for non-technical risks because the SIEM is primarily looking for technical exploits. But it's not going to, tell us when someone's calling us asking for information that they shouldn't be asking for, right? A SIEM is not going to tell us when somebody shows up at the bank wanting to plug a wireless access point into our network. And so we really have a balanced approach towards monitoring for accepted risk, where we hope that the incident response team is overseeing and trying to understand what they need to understand about the technical side of things. And then, of course, we have auditors coming in on a cyclical basis, making sure that we are indeed enforcing the plan which enforces the policy through the use of our non-technical and technical monitoring processes. And so a basic decision tree if you're wondering, well, he keeps talking about these decision trees, why does he call a decision tree, is what we're really talking about. We developed these way a long time ago in 2000 when we first started developing our managed security services, because we needed proactive instructions from our clients that would tell us how to react. If we see this in the network traffic, how do you want us to respond? Do you want us to call you? Do you want us to email you? Do you want us to, block the traffic? That sort of thing. And so over the course of time, we ended up collecting a bunch of typical if-then statements. If this happens, then do that. And that's really how decision trees were born, pretty much across the board. This isn't just something that Infotex does. Most of your managed security service providers have a decision tree. I learned recently that some of them don't like to publish their decision tree. We don't, share ours with people that aren't our clientele because we feel it's proprietary, but we do share it with our clients because we want to make sure that our clients are weighing in on how we respond to an incident. But let's just take a look at that decision tree. Like all of our boilerplates, they're a starting point. We're not saying they're perfect. We just are using them to illustrate you what you could do, or illustrate to you, I should say, what you could do. And once you customize the boilerplate to yourself, you get to keep the copyright as long as you let us keep the copyright. We need to update our copyrights. But what we originally started off way back in 2000 with was basic network traffic decision tree. It's, if we see this, here's how we're going to react immediately. Here's how we're going to notify our client. And then these are the follow-up duties that should occur. Okay, and so, if it's a virus, the follow-up duty needs to be, handled by the client staff, unless you want to pay us to come out and remove a virus from your, endpoint, which most people don't want to do. Quickly, we started saying, hey, should we call an emergency, we used to call it a CERT back in the day, a computer incident response team meeting. Or is this the type of incident that the technical team can handle? We don't need to involve the non-technical people on the incident response team. And then finally, is this something that should go in the report to the board? In 2004, we started developing our event log management system. It came out of beta in 2005. And of course, we ended up, developing a event log management decision tree, which this is actually the sample decision tree. We needed to erase all this, but anyway, and so it's good that we can show you samples here. And so we started collecting, and over time we said, hey, if we see failed login attempts, this is how we're going to immediately react to it. This is who we're going to notify, and this is the follow-up duties by the client, not us. Should it be reported to the board? Do we need to call an emergency, CERT meeting, et cetera? And if you go down here, you'll see that most of the things that we see in event logs, unless we correlate it back to our network traffic and see something big going on, doesn't usually require a lot of emergency reaction to it. And so where I'm kind of heading with this is because, again, this is proprietary. We don't really want to share our event log and our network traffic decision trees unless you're a client of ours. And if you don't have this on file, if you're a client, be sure to ask Chad or Mike the next time you have an annual review meeting, or the next, if you need it right away, let us know, and we'll get to you our decision tree. We have a default decision tree, and then we have how it's been modified based on your instructions to us, because our clients, they don't know what to put in our decision tree, so we start off, of course, with the default decision tree. But what the cusp of this webinar is going to be about is training the incident response team on how we should react when the incident response team is involved. And so we've been maintaining this non-technical incident response decision tree, and I'll have to, confess, I think it was, quite a while, I'd say probably 2014, 2015 is the last time we updated this. But it makes a good starting point for you to, document how you feel you would react in the event of someone coming into the branch wanting to plug a wireless access point into your network, or, finding we could include things as mundane as, and unfortunately as recurring as, finding unlocked workstations, or, we find unlicensed software on the network, or, heaven forbid, a new technology is causing unforeseen problems. I mean, that happens all the time, right? But we also have some, pretty important incidents in here that maybe the incident response team hasn't even thought could happen. And so the whole gist of the webinar here is that, and by the way, for smaller banks, I wouldn't include this as a formal document. I wouldn't paint yourself into a corner that every time we find rogue USB sticks, we're going to treat it as a malicious incident. We're going to, do this. We're going to do that. Here's our follow-up duties, and, we should call an emergency CERT meeting. Okay, I'm not saying that you want to document this as a part of your plan. What I'm saying is that when you have a free 10 minutes, or when it's one of those months where you're like, what, we don't really have a lot to go over this month, let's start talking about what could happen. Maybe you go through here and you do a risk assessment and you say, I have all this stuff that Infotext is queued up. What we think is the most likely are these things here, and how should we react when we find workstations unlocked? I just lock them for them, but should we put a sticky note on their workstation? Am I overstepping my bounds if I talk to the employee about the fact that, hey, you've been gone all day, or you went to lunch and I've been in here and I could have sent an email message to your boss, from you because you didn't lock your workstation or whatever. But the point is that we should have these conversations with our incident response team prior to us being in a panic. And so for the webinar today, what we're going to share with you, and Mike, if you want to go ahead and send this out now, but we're going to share you just the non-technical side of this incident response team. And so we've got just a blank document here, and then we have, the full-blown document. We feel that, over the course of a year, if you decide, hey, I'm going to knock off 3 of these statements, I'm going to prioritize them based on what I think is the most likely, and, I'm going to try to get through 3 statements a month, we feel that your incident response team will be in a much better position to effectively respond to incidents if you use an incident response decision tree as the basis of their training. Mike, how did the poll shake out?
Let's take a look at the results. 9% said we don't have one, 27% said annually, 36% said quarterly, 9% said bi-monthly, and 18% said monthly. And then we also had an outlier that said that they meet semi-annually.
Okay. Well, 18% of the people at the webinar are probably our clients, because I make the case you should meet monthly. If you don't have an incident response team, boy, I'd at least identify who's going to be coming together when we're in a big panic. Those of you who are meeting quarterly, I say, leave your policy as quarterly, but maybe what you do is when you update your plan, maybe you have 2 months in a row where you're meeting, because I don't know how you get through all the work that's required by guidance with a quarterly meeting. Guidance requires that you have, let's just take tabletop tests. The way the guidance reads is that A, you want to walk your team through the plan. B, you want to propose a test plan, and in that test plan you choose the incident type, which is usually, we would usually prefer that to be data leakage, or some type of an incident where we're forced to notify our customers. And then C, you have the tabletop test, and then D, you have your postmortem review. Well, that's 4 different meetings right there. You're going to spread them out over the whole course of the year. I just can't see how that works. So don't mean to chastise those of you who aren't meeting monthly. I'm just saying that you don't want to paint yourself in the corner where you have to have monthly meetings. And I realize that in smaller institutions you're wearing a lot of hats. But I also feel that you might come to regret only meeting quarterly when there truly is a disclosure incident. You're having to notify your customers, and you're in a situation where your management team is challenging you every step along the way because they don't want to notify the customers. They haven't been trained on the fact that customer notification is actually a good thing. It's the moral thing. It's the right thing to do. Again, the mission of a good incident response program is that the management team recognizes the process as it unfolds. We have clients where, there's been some bad things happen, but because the management team recognized the process as it unfolded, they turned the lemon into lemonade. People went into their bank saying, wow, you guys really handled this right. I just got a letter from the hospital, but from you, I got this, you did that. You know, I really can tell you value our identities. You value us as customers. If you're meeting quarterly, I fear that you're going to be hard-pressed to have the ability to turn a lemon into a lemonade. Mike, I think this is where you take over. Are there any questions from the attendees?
No questions, Dan. But yeah, thank you for your time, Dan, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Dan, for your time, and as always, your expertise, and everybody have a great day.
Thanks a lot.
When you view an InfoText webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoText presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoText webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoText reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the web page listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.